What would you do if you realized the space around you was no longer obeying the laws of reality, and neither were you? This question lingers like a whispered omen over every soul aboard the Imperial vessel Eterna's wake, though none of them know it yet. For now, they believe they are safe, secure, bound by the iron certainty of Imperial doctrine and the unquestionable authority of the Emperor's design. They gather in disciplined quiet, the air thick with incense and the scent of cold iron, as the captain delivers the mission that will unknowingly lead them into the jaws of the warp itself. Their destination is routine, their purpose mundane, a transport operation across a well-charted warp route, one that has carried thousands of ships safely before. It is the kind of assignment a veteran crew accepts with confidence, if not boredom. But even as the briefing begins, there is a tremor beneath the surface of ordinary duty, a faint disturbance like a distant ripple spreading from an unseen stone dropped into the depths of time. Captain Marius Halbrecht stands at the center of his command chamber, his voice steady, authoritative, shaped by decades of service. He explains the course, the expected duration, and the strategic importance of their cargo, classified, but known to contain relics destined for a distant shrine world. His words are firm, but the crew notices the subtle tension in the way his jaw grinds between sentences, as if he can feel something pressing against the hull of the future. Still, discipline leaves no room for fear. The officers nod, the adepts record, the lower deck crew listens with quiet reverence. Duty is everything, obedience is survival. The warp, after all, is a tool of travel, so long as the Emperor's light shines clearly. Yet even during the briefing, small hints of wrongness begin to pierce the normal flow of routine. The ship's choir of astropaths report faint static bleeding into their meditative trance, like whispers threading through the void. A Vox officer notes momentary distortion in the comms, just a crackle, dismissed as calibration noise. The tech priests recite binharic prayers over a cluster of wayward instruments that flicker with unsanctioned luminescence before returning to stability. No one connects these anomalies. No one considers them warnings. They are nothing more than glitches, the kind expected on any voyage. But Navigator Saras Vorkian knows better. Standing quietly at the edge of the room, his third eye concealed behind ceremonial plating, he feels something off. A faint dimming in the distant astronomican signal, a soft wavering like a candle threatened by a draft. It unsettles him, but he remains silent. A navigator does not sow fear without certainty. Instead, he offers a formal assurance that the path ahead is clear, even though deep within the labyrinth of his senses, something scrapes along the unseen edges of the warp, watching. As the briefing concludes, the crew disperses with mechanical precision. They return to their duties, each step echoing through the metal bones of the ship as engines hum with igniting power. There is faith in their hearts and discipline in their bones, yet a whisper of unease clings to them like cold mist. They do not know why. They do not understand its source. But the warp understands them. And long before their ship enters its tides, it has already begun to take notice. The Eterna's wake prepares to depart, unaware that this mission briefing is the last moment of normalcy they will ever experience. When the Eterna's wake finally slips into the warp, the transition is smooth, almost too smooth. Veterans aboard the ship privately note the absence of the usual lurch, the bone-deep shudder that accompanies most entries into the immaterium. Instead, the shift feels like drifting across a silent threshold, as if the ship has been gently welcomed rather than forcefully swallowed. It is a detail small enough for most to forget within moments, yet it lingers like an aftertaste of something faintly metallic, faintly wrong. The warp around them appears stable according to every instrument. The navigator maintains a firm connection to the astronomican's guiding flame. The tech priests chant in binary harmony. The Gellar Field thrums with protective resonance. Everything should be perfect. And still, the air feels different. Thicker, heavy, as though the ship is traveling through something more than immaterial tides, something that notices its passage. Then comes the first distortion. It begins subtly, as all true warp anomalies do. A fleeting flicker in the lumen strips that crew members initially blame on faulty wiring. A brief moment where a corridor appears slightly longer than it was the day before. A few seconds where an ensign pauses mid-step, confused, because she could swear she heard someone whisper her name from just behind her shoulder, even though she stands alone. Such things are easy to dismiss. The warp is rarely kind, but it is often strange in ways that do not immediately threaten. But then patterns emerge. On the command deck, officers notice it first, a rhythmic pulsing in the auger readouts, like a heartbeat echoing through the machinery. The pulse doesn't match any ship function. It doesn't match any known warp signature. It is simply there, steady, patient, watching them through numbers and data streams. When the pulse stops, it leaves behind an inexplicable silence, a silence that feels like held breath. Navigator Sarah's Vorkian feels the change acutely. His connection to the Astronomicon wavers, not enough to disrupt navigation, but enough to sting like a pinprick against his mind. He senses a flicker, a tremor, as if the guiding beacon has been momentarily eclipsed by something vast drifting between him and the Emperor's light. He attempts to recalibrate his inner sight, but every adjustment leaves behind a faint echo in his skull, like distant footsteps fading into fog. Throughout the lower decks, the crew feels a simultaneous wave of dizziness. It passes quickly, without explanation. Men blink, shake their heads, and continue working. But for a few terrifying seconds, many of them swear they saw shadows moving against the walls, shadows with no bodies to cast them. Others hear faint echoes of laughter or murmured hymns that no one around them is singing. A few drop their tools and swear the corridor floor shifted beneath them like the deck of a storm-tossed ship. By the time reports reach the captain, the distortions have stopped. Instruments return to normal, voices disappear, shadows hold still, rational explanations flood the minds of the faithful, exhaustion, stress, calibration errors, or simple warp turbulence. The crew wants to believe these things. They need to believe them. Fear is a poison, and in the warp it can kill as swiftly as any weapon. But Captain Halbrecht feels a cold unease spreading through him, a sensation like the early stages of sickness. Something is wrong. It is wrong in a way that cannot be quantified, cannot be charted or recorded. It is the kind of wrongness that lives between thoughts, in the empty spaces where instinct and dread intertwine. He orders increased vigilance but speaks nothing of his deeper fears. For now, the Eterna's wake continues its journey. The crew resumes their duties. Silence settles. Order returns. Yet somewhere in the depths of the warp, something ancient and patient turns its attention fully upon the ship, and smiles. The moment the Eterna's wake is truly lost does not begin with an explosion or a scream. It begins with a silence so sudden, so absolute, that every soul aboard feels it in their bones before their minds can comprehend it. One instant, the warp hums around them with its familiar chaotic vibration. The next, it goes still, deathly still, like the void is holding its breath. And in that breathless pause, every beating heart aboard the ship seems to hesitate, as though waiting for something hidden and inevitable. On the command deck, the navigator stiffens. His skin pales as if drained of all color, and his hands tremble against the armrests of his station. Behind the sealed mask covering his third eye, something unseen thrashes against the boundaries of his mind. He opens his mouth to speak, but the words die before reaching his tongue. Instead, a single whisper escapes him, barely audible, barely human. It's gone. The captain turns sharply. What's gone? The navigator does not answer immediately. The air temperature drops a few degrees. Frost blooms across the edges of Auspec's panels. Tiny droplets of condensation form on the inside of the Gellar Field conduits, shivering like frightened creatures. The hull creaks in a way metal should never creak, as if the ship itself is recoiling from whatever surrounds it. Then the navigator finally speaks. The Astronomicon, it's gone. Not dimmed, not distant, not weakened. Gone, gone, as if someone had extinguished the Emperor's holy beacon with a pinch of their fingers. For a moment, disbelieving silence grips the bridge. The Astronomicon cannot simply vanish. It is the most constant presence in the galaxy, a psychic storm burning brighter than any star. But the navigator feels nothing. No light, no direction, no signature, only empty blackness, and something moving beneath it. The ship reacts instantly. Warning chimes erupt like shrill cries for help. Systems flicker violently. Pressure drops. Instruments freeze mid-readout before spasming into impossible values. Negative distances, reversed time stamps, coordinates that do not exist in any Imperial chart. The engines surge, then stall, then surge again as if being yanked by unseen tides. Across the lower decks, crew members stagger as the floor shifts beneath their feet, tilting, rippling, almost breathing. A bulkhead vibrates so violently it knocks a junior officer unconscious. A prayer servo bursts into flame without ignition. A mechanic screams and claws at his ears, claiming he can hear thousands of voices whispering directions to places that have no names. The warp opens, not like a door, not like a storm, but like an eye. A tear in the immaterium forms beside the ship, silent, vast, and hungry. It is impossible to perceive directly, yet every soul aboard feels its presence like a pressure on the back of their necks, a sensation of being studied by something that has never known the meaning of mercy. The rupture stretches wide, but it does not swallow the ship abruptly. Not yet, it pulls gently, almost tenderly, as though inviting the vessel into its embrace. The Gellar Field strains. Its holy barrier flickers and stutters under the assault of forces no mortal technology was built to withstand. Sparks cascade from sacred conduits. Priests shout prayers of protection, their voices cracking as they try to drown out the rising chorus of whispers curling through the bulkheads. Then, with a sound like a sigh from a dying god, the Gellar Field buckles. Reality folds. The lights die. Gravity slips. Time bends like molten metal. There is no explosion, no grand spectacle. Just a flicker, and the Eterna's wake is no longer where it once was. No coordinates, no reference points, no guiding light, just a void of impossible depth, stretching forever. The ship hangs suspended in a region of the warp untouched by the Emperor's radiance, a region where thought and fear blend seamlessly into the fabric of existence. The crew drifts between heartbeats, trapped in a place where time moves wrong and reality tastes different. The Eterna's wake is lost. Truly, utterly, hopelessly lost. And in the darkness that surrounds it, something ancient opens its attention fully, as though welcoming a long-awaited guest. At first, the crew believes the worst has already happened. The Astronomicon is gone. The Gellar Field has nearly collapsed. The ship has been swallowed by a region of the warp with no name, no map, and no hope. What more could the immaterium possibly take from them? They soon learn the answer. Everything they trust about reality itself. Time fractures gently at first, like thin ice cracking under an unseen weight. A deck officer reviewing chronometer logs notices a discrepancy of only a few seconds, hardly enough to provoke alarm in the vast uncertainty of the warp. But then another crew member's clock shows minutes missing. A third reveals an impossible future timestamp, as though the device has jumped ahead of the present. And soon, none of the ship's chronometers agree with each other. The crew tries to reset them, but the moment their fingers leave the controls, the numbers shift again. Some move backward, some freeze mid-tick, some accelerate, skipping seconds like a panicked heartbeat. The first report reaches the bridge with the calm efficiency of Imperial discipline, but by the time the 10th report arrives, each one more contradictory than the last, fear begins to seep into the voices of even the most hardened officers. Meanwhile, on the lower decks, stranger things are happening. Crew members experience moments of déjà vu so intense they drop tools from shaking hands. One technician claims he lived through the same 10 seconds 3 times, each repetition identical except for the final one, where he heard someone whispering his name behind him, even though no one was there. Another swears she walked past a corridor intersection and saw herself standing at the other end, staring silently before fading like a mirage. Others lose hours. They blink, and suddenly find themselves elsewhere. One man swears he was repairing a plasma conduit only a moment ago, yet he awakens in the mess hall with half-eaten food before him and no memory of how he got there. The ship's logs confirm, nothing. Entries loop, overwrite themselves, or contradict their own data. An event recorded at 0900 hours appears again at 0857. A repair logged as completed is later logged as not yet started. A work shift ends before it was ever scheduled to begin. Men and women trained for order and precision suddenly find themselves stripped of every measure of certainty. The warp has reached inside their minds and begun to twist the flow of experience itself. On the command deck, Captain Halbrecht feels the weight of every distortion mounting like a physical pressure. He demands a full diagnostic of every chronometric device on the ship. The results are worse than anyone expects. Not only are the clocks wrong, but their internal mechanisms have shifted, as though time itself has reshaped the gears and circuits to match its own deranged rhythm. The tech priests offer no solutions. Their ritualized repairs only cause the devices to shudder and whine. One adept reports that when he opened a chronometer casing, he found the interior coated with a frost that did not melt, even in the warmth of his hands. He also reports hearing a faint ticking coming from inside the metal walls long after the device was removed. Then comes the first crew-wide temporal fracture. It happens without warning, without sound, without any identifiable cause. Every living soul aboard the Eterna's wake suddenly freezes, not physically, but mentally. Their thoughts halt, their breaths pause mid-inhale. Their awareness dims like lanterns starved of oxygen. For what feels like an eternity, the entire ship exists in perfect stillness, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. Then, just as suddenly, time resumes. Crew members gasp, collapse, weep without knowing why, Some swear they heard voices murmuring instructions to them during the frozen moment. Others insist they saw shapes drifting through the halted world, shapes that noticed the crew even when the crew could not move. Navigator Sarah's Vorkian suffers the worst. His mind, already strained by the loss of the Astronomicon, cracks further as temporal distortion ravages his senses. He clutches his skull, screaming that timelines are colliding, that the ship is slipping between different hours like a bead rolling across broken glass. When he quiets, he whispers something even more disturbing. We are not alone in this time. Something is watching us from every moment we've ever lived. The crew tries to maintain order, but discipline fractures as quickly as time itself. Officers argue over contradictory reports. Crew members accuse each other of disappearing or repeating conversations that never happened. No one can trust their memories, because the warp has begun rewriting them freely. In the heart of the Eterna's wake, time itself is bleeding. And the ship is drifting deeper into a realm where moments devour one another. And where something ancient waits patiently for the crew to crumble. At first, the voices seem like nothing more than symptoms of exhaustion. After all, the crew of the Eterna's wake has been battered by temporal fractures, warped memories, and the crushing realization that they are adrift in a region of the warp where the Emperor's light cannot reach. Minds under pressure can conjure illusions. Stress can produce echoes. Fatigue can distort perception. That is what the rational, disciplined crew tells themselves, before the voices grow stronger. They begin innocently, soft murmurs in the background of silence, so quiet that most crew members assume they are imagining things. A whisper drifting through ventilation shafts. A faint call echoing from distant hallways. A tone in the comms that resembles someone sighing. None of it is enough to raise alarms. But it is enough to plant fear. Then the voices become recognizable. A junior deckhand is the first to break. He hears his mother's voice calling his childhood nickname, something no one aboard the ship has ever known. He drops his tools and runs toward the sound, desperate, trembling, eyes filled with tears he doesn't realize he's shedding. When he reaches the corridor where the voice originates, he finds nothing. Only the sound of her laughter fading into the metal walls. When his squadmates discover him minutes later, he is curled on the floor, whispering her name as though it might summon her. He is not the last. Another crew member freezes mid-step when she hears her deceased brother reciting a prayer they once shared. A weapons officer hears the voice of his own commander ordering him to stand down, only to realize the commander is standing beside him, confused and silent. A ration clerk hears her future self scream her own name in a tone filled with terror. She collapses, choking on her breath, insisting that she felt her future fear clawing at her bones. The voices multiply like a plague. They speak through memories, through regrets, through love, through loss, through every emotional wound the warp can tear open. Some voices plead, some accuse, some offer small comforts, some whisper impossible truths that burrow beneath the skin. And some speak in perfect imitation, too perfect. On the bridge, Vox channels activate on their own, crackling to life without input. Static floods the air, but beneath the noise, faint syllables twist into discernible words. They speak the names of officers in flawless mimicry, as though someone on the other side of the signal is watching them closely, intimately, and waiting. The tech priests attempt to purge the channels, but each ritual only shifts the frequencies. Sometimes they catch snippets of conversations that never happened, messages from voices that sound like the crew but use phrases no one recognizes. One transmission lasts exactly 7 seconds and plays back the captain's voice counting slowly from 1 to 7, while the real captain watches in horror. The navigator suffers the worst of all. Sarah's Vorkian is bombarded by psychic echoes that batter his senses with unbearable force. He claims that the warp is speaking through him, not to him. He hears not just voices but entire conversations, thousands of them, overlapping in a maddening chorus that seems to originate from different moments of time. Some are past, some are future, some are from timelines he does not recognize at all. One night, he wakes screaming, clawing at his head, shouting that he heard himself speaking from another lifetime, begging for mercy. The voices spread beyond sound. Some crew members begin to hear thoughts that aren't theirs. Others feel emotions imposed upon them, as though someone has reached into their minds and twisted their feelings like strings on a puppet. And worst of all, some hear a single, specific voice that none of them can explain. It is calm, deep, patient, ancient, speaking in a tone that carries neither malice nor kindness, only curiosity. It asks them questions. It asks them to listen. It asks them to remember things they never lived. It asks them to imagine futures they will never reach. And sometimes, it calls them by names they have never told anyone. The crew tries to drown the voices in hymns, in chants, in machinery noise. But the warp is not a sound that can be silenced. It is a presence, a subtle hand resting upon their minds. And now that it has their attention, it does not loosen its grip. By the end of this phase, the Eterna's wake is no longer just lost in the warp. The warp has begun to speak to them, and it is learning how to make itself understood. When the voices become unbearable, the crew realizes that the Eterna's wake itself is changing. At first, the alterations are minor, hallways seem longer, doors appear in places they were never built, and the hum of the ship's engines warps with strange harmonics. But these small distortions are only the beginning. The warp has begun to twist the very structure of reality, and reality resists only as weakly as it can in this place of infinite entropy. Gravity fluctuates in unpredictable pockets. A corridor may suddenly tilt, leaving an officer clinging desperately to railings that were once solid beneath his feet. Objects drift upward or sideways, then snap back with violent suddenness. Crew members drop tools, only to see them suspended midair for seconds that feel like hours before they crash with a delayed, unnatural weight. The air grows thick and viscous in some chambers, as though the warp itself has seeped into the ship's lifeblood. Metals seem to sweat blood, a slow crimson moisture spreading along conduits and bulkheads that should remain cold and sterile. Even the sacred metals of the Gellar Field shriek faintly under strain, their surface pulsing like the skin of some immense, unseen creature. Priests and tech priests alike begin to report visions through their rituals. The priestly chants, meant to fortify the vessel, now return twisted reflections. He sees shadow-latticed gods, faces pressed against reality as if seeking entry, but never fully materializing. He sees the shapes of things not meant to exist, crawling just beyond comprehension. Even those with the most rigid faith feel a creeping doubt as their own senses betray them. Doors lead where they should not. Stairwells descend into endless loops. Crew members open maintenance hatches only to find themselves staring into the void, corridors stretching to infinity, or perhaps compressed to impossibility. Each attempt to map the ship fails, as maps themselves shift and rewrite with each step the crew takes. Hallways appear familiar, yet subtly different, like a memory that refuses to stay intact. And yet, the ship's own systems behave as though conscious. Lights flicker not according to power supply, but according to something deliberate, something observing. The hum of machinery accelerates or slows in unnatural patterns, often coinciding with moments of rising fear or tension among the crew. It is as though the ship is listening, learning, experimenting. The warp does not just manipulate the physical. It begins to affect thought itself. Crew members struggle to differentiate reality from hallucination. Some see people they know walking past them who vanish when approached. Others hear conversations that occurred long ago, or that have not yet occurred, spoken in voices that are their own, and their heartbeats accelerate in terror and recognition at the same time. Memory, time, and perception intertwine until no one can trust anything, not even their own eyes, their own minds, their own instincts. Navigator Sarah's Vorkian seals himself in the meditation chamber, muttering incoherently about the redrawing of existence, and claiming he can see threads connecting every distortion. He warns that each anomaly is a seed, each fluctuation a trial. The warp is testing them, learning how the minds of mortals respond to its influence. And all the while, the Eterna's wake drifts deeper into a region where reality bends with cruel intent. The crew begins to understand, in fragments of thought and terror, that their world is no longer governed by the Emperor, by physics, or by time. It is governed by the warp, by its curiosity, and by something that waits patiently beyond understanding. At that moment, a simple truth pierces the hearts of every officer and enlisted alike. They are no longer just lost. They are being hunted by the ship itself, as if it were a living extension of the warp's will, and nothing aboard can be trusted, not even the ground beneath their feet, not even their own thoughts. The Eterna's wake has become a vessel of mutating reality, and the warp has begun to whisper, slowly and deliberately. Do you understand yet? Fear, once abstract, now becomes corporeal. It claws through the minds of the crew, but the warp is not satisfied with whispers or shifting walls alone. It reaches further. It reaches for life itself. The first casualty comes quietly, almost imperceptibly. One of the junior engineers, tasked with monitoring the ship's failing systems, steps through a corridor that no longer seems bound by geometry. The metal underfoot twists subtly, bending and stretching, though no eye can perceive it. He stumbles, calling out to unseen hands, and for a heartbeat he seems lost, but then the corridor straightens. The engineer is gone. The crew find no body. No blood, no trace. It is as though he was never there. Yet when the others look at the empty space, a shiver of recognition passes through them. They saw him, spoke to him, laughed alongside him, but now, nothing remains. Not even a shadow. Panic erupts. Orders are barked, voices tremble, and faith wavers. Men and women trained to endure the horrors of the warp find themselves incapable of rational thought. Some blame hallucination, some blame the ship, some stare into the darkness, praying the Emperor will intervene. No one believes the truth aloud. Something aboard the ship is taking them. Then it begins to escalate. Others disappear in the same manner, engineers, deckhands, even a sergeant who was certain of his experience and his faith. They vanish mid-task, mid-step, mid-breath. The survivors swear they see them reflected in polished metal walls or hear their screams echoing through vent shafts that contain no air. And yet, whenever anyone reaches the place where a person vanished, the space is impossibly ordinary, the corridor solid, the floor unmoving, the walls unbroken. The warp does not kill in the conventional sense. It erases, folds, and absorbs. It plays with perception before claiming what it desires. The survivors begin to notice patterns, terrifying and deliberate. Vanishing always occurs when attention wavers, when fear peaks, when doubt seeps in. It is as if the ship, or what inhabits it, feeds on uncertainty and shapes it into reality before consuming the flesh of those who cannot resist. Morale collapses completely. Discipline becomes meaningless. Officers cannot maintain order, for their own hands tremble with the knowledge that any misstep might be their last. The priestly chants, once a source of protection and reassurance, falter under the psychic weight of absence. Their sacred words echo into corridors that now seem infinitely long, returning distorted and mocking, as if the warp itself repeats the prayers with perverse intent. Captain Halbrecht feels the first stirrings of despair in himself. He cannot command absence. He cannot fight the unseen. He can only witness, powerless, as the crew unravels around him. Each disappearance chips away at the semblance of control he has maintained since leaving real space. By the end of the first night in this region of the warp, nearly a fifth of the crew is gone. Some vanish quietly, some vanish screaming, and those who remain do not know whether to mourn, to resist, or to pray for their own erasure. A single truth emerges from the terror. The warp has begun its hunt, and it is patient, precise, and merciless. The Eterna's wake is no longer just a ship. It is a cage, and the hunters are already inside. With the first casualties behind them, the crew of the Eterna's wake teeters on the edge of collective madness. Rational thought, discipline, and training, once the pillars of survival, fracture under the relentless psychic pressure of the warp. Time itself has become unreliable. Reality has begun to mutate. And now, the living crew is haunted not just by absence, but by the knowledge that nothing aboard the ship can be trusted. Hysteria spreads like a contagion. Officers shout contradictory orders. Crew members argue over events that may never have happened. One engineer claims to have already repaired a plasma conduit that others swear remains untouched. Another insists he has walked the same corridor a dozen times within a single minute, each time seeing impossible variations of the walls and doors. Memory no longer anchors them. Each mind is a fragile vessel, leaking sanity into the warp like water through a sieve. Some begin to forget who they are. Names, ranks, and faces blur in their minds. A weapons officer, once fiercely loyal, mistakes a junior deckhand for a hostile presence and nearly strikes him down before realizing it is his own misjudgment. Others claim to remember lives they never lived, conversations never spoken, and places never visited. Each false recollection chips away at their grasp on the present. Fear becomes tangible. The crew whispers in corners, checking each other's eyes for traces of reality. Sleep offers no relief. Dreams are invaded by the same voices that haunt the corridors, carrying visions of impossible futures and pasts that never occurred. Some awaken convinced that their deaths have already happened, or that they have already killed others. Every reflection in polished metal becomes a possible threat, every shadow a predator. Arguments escalate into violence. Conflicts arise over trivial disagreements, magnified by warped perceptions and psychic manipulation. Officers struggle to maintain authority as factions form instinctively, each trying to interpret reality in its own way. Faith, once a protective shield, becomes brittle and selective. Prayers return warped echoes or disturbingly accurate warnings of deaths yet to come. Even the priestly hymns are twisted by the warp, returning distorted and mocking, sowing panic where they once brought calm. Amidst the chaos, Navigator Saras Vorkian retreats further into himself. He warns that the ship is no longer a vessel but a trap. The warp is testing us, he murmurs to no one in particular, prodding our minds, stretching our perceptions, breaking our reason, and learning. His words are met with fear, disbelief, or incomprehension. Captain Halbrecht attempts to enforce order, but even his authority bends beneath the psychic strain. Each attempt to rally the crew is met with confusion or aggression. Men and women trained to follow orders hesitate or contradict commands. The Gellar Field flickers in response to their mounting fear, its sacred hum strained and distorted, as if echoing the chaos within their minds. And through it all, the voices persist, murmuring, cajoling, mocking. They speak in familiar tones, whisper forbidden knowledge, repeat secrets, and imitate the crew themselves. In combination with the mutating corridors, shifting time, and unexplained disappearances, the voices transform fear into a living entity that stalks every mind aboard the ship. By the third cycle of what passes for day in the Eterna's wake, hysteria has become universal. Rationality is a memory, sanity a fragile illusion. No one sleeps, no one rests. Each step, each breath, each glance might summon the warp's attention or reveal an absence. Every living crewmember exists in a constant state of dread, and all realize, without needing to say it aloud, that their survival may already be impossible. The ship itself seems to pulse with the collective panic. Hallways stretch, lights flicker, gravity shifts without pattern, reality flexes under their terror. And in this growing storm of fear, the warp is no longer distant. It is intimate, invasive, and unyielding. The crew has crossed the threshold. They are no longer simply lost, they are prey, scattered and fragmented within the teeth of a timeless, unfeeling predator. And the hunter waits, patient and precise, for the next mistake. The Eterna's wake drifts deeper into a reality that is no longer theirs. Time splinters, corridors stretch into impossible lengths. Voices, whispers, and the mimicry of absent loved ones fill every compartment. Each crew member is fraying, caught between memory, delusion, and the undeniable presence of something vast lurking beyond perception. Captain Marius Halbrecht, the last anchor of authority, stands alone on the bridge. The navigator, eyes wild and unseeing, murmurs of threads connecting everything, of a consciousness in the warp that has been observing and shaping them since their first step into this lost region. Halbrecht realizes, with the sinking clarity of inevitability, that the ship will be consumed, their minds devoured, unless he acts decisively. The solution is brutal, immediate, and terrifying. The Gellar Field must be overloaded. A controlled detonation could tear a rift back to real space, but it could also annihilate the ship entirely. And with it, every soul aboard. The captain knows the choice is not survival versus death, it is survival versus the warp, and no outcome is safe. Before he can act, the ancient presence fully manifests, not as a form, but as an intelligence, a will that presses against their thoughts. It speaks directly into Halbrecht's mind, offering knowledge, power, even the resurrection of those the crew has lost to the warp. The temptation is precise, a psychic snare, but Halbrecht sees the truth. Nothing offered is genuine, every promise is bait, every choice, a trap. The crew fractures further, some falling into the warp's seduction, others striking out at imagined threats, yet none able to escape the psychic tension that binds them. The ship becomes a crucible of fear, faith, and madness. In the final moments, Halbrecht acts. He orders the Gellar Field overloaded. Every crew member braces, some screaming, some praying, some frozen in disbelief. Reality fractures violently, corridors twist, gravity collapses, and the ship shudders as if the bones of the galaxy itself were snapping. Light bends backward, shadows stretch impossibly long, the warp presses close, 1,000 fingers probing the last vestiges of mortal minds. Then, silence. When the Eterna's wake emerges, the ship is only partially whole. The Gellar Field, though ruptured, has torn a fragile path back into real space. The few survivors stagger, broken in body and spirit. Some are missing, claimed forever by the warp. Some are hollow, their memories incomplete or corrupted. Their faith remains, but it is fragile, haunted by truths too immense to comprehend. Time itself has betrayed them. Some records show hours missing, some show decades, some show events that never occurred. The ship drifts through space like a haunted relic, and those aboard are left to wonder, did they truly return, or has the warp simply allowed them a glimpse of false reality before drawing them back into its depths? And then, even as the crew attempts to recover, a final whisper echoes through the broken Vox network. I never left. The phrase is spoken in the captain's own voice, distorted, fragmented, impossible to trace. It lingers in the minds of the survivors, a warning and a promise. Something, some intelligence, some presence, escaped with them from the warp. They are free of its immediate grasp. But the dread remains. The Eterna's wake sails silently through the void, a vessel carrying survivors who are haunted, changed, and forever marked by the dimension that defies the Emperor's light. In the end, the question remains, unanswerable and unbearable. What truly happens when an Imperial ship gets lost in the warp? Some survive to tell fragments of the story. Some are already consumed in ways no one will ever understand. And all are left with the certainty that the warp is patient, and it is always watching. The ship drifts onward, and the universe keeps its secrets. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.